The youngest of the three independent amigos, Rob Oakeshott, made a beeline for home this afternoon to reacquaint himself with his family and contemplate Julia Gillard's offer of a ministry. But Tony Windsor and Bob Katter have remained in Canberra for long enough to talk with us tonight, and they join me now. Tony Windsor, there was one thing that puzzled me in what you said today, and it was when you said that you thought if an election was called now, another election was called immediately, that Tony Abbott would win it. Now, why do you think Tony Abbott would win another election now?
Well, Kerry, it was in the context that in relation to the things we took into account, I took into account in making a decision. And one of those things, particularly through the first week, was there was a lot of background noise, not from Tony Abbott, but from people within the Liberal and National parties, that they believed that their interests might be better served to allow this Parliament to go to Labor. And if they were fortunate enough to get the numbers, that they'd only exist there until such times as the polls showed that they could win an election. So that one of the things we were looking for was really stability of government, workability of government, and longevity of government. And obviously it's going to be difficult to find that in these circumstances.
But you went a little further than that and said that if you thought the election was held immediately, that Tony Abbott would win. Now, why do you think that?
Well, I think they think that.
You said you thought that.
Yeah. Well, that's my interpretation of what I was being told, that they thought they might have been on a winner if the whole thing fell in a heap fairly quickly. Okay. Obviously, it's one of the options today that we were trying to avoid was a 75-75. So, in which case there would have been an election. That we're talking hypothetically. Okay,
Bob Katter, now having gone, and you explained at length why you'd opted to support the coalition, mindful of the fact that your two colleagues may be going the other way. But you said, when asked what you would do if a Gillard government was formed, and you said, I would certainly see a moral responsibility to look at the issue of stability. Always got on with Julia. There's an implication there that you will effectively do with the Gillard government what you were offering the coalition. Is that a proper understanding?
Well, I made a choice. I put out my 20 points that I really think are absolute necessities for our survival in rural Australia, if not for ordinary Australians. And it was simply a matter of, those are the policies. Now, what are the policies of your government with respect to those policies? Really, in my case, it was pretty mathematical, but I deliberately did that, Kerry. I absolutely deliberately did that to bind myself in, because I knew there'd be enormous pressures coming upon us, and I was able to say, I think where the cards fall, that's what's going to happen. And that's where I went in the end. Now, if it was my vote, then that vote would have gone to Tony Abbott, not to Julia. But I didn't have a vote in the end, so I suppose it didn't matter.
But now, in terms of, how will you now approach the Parliament and this new government? Obviously, each piece of legislation on its merits. But do you now have the view that, for instance, Andrew Wilkie had with regard to the coalition when he'd sided with Labor, where he said that he would still not support a frivolous no confidence motion against the coalition, and that he would still guarantee supply to a coalition government? In other words, would you take the same approach to the Gillard government?
I took a very considered opinion on those 20 issues which I laid down, and it took me 5 or 6 days under a lot of pressure to put that together. In this case, you're asking me to, within 10 hours, decide on a very, very important matter indeed. And I can only answer you by saying at this stage that there are those that say that Italy has a very democratic form of government every 5 minutes.
That's right.
And I've never, thought that was a good model for government. So I would say, no, we don't want that model for government. The processes here in Australia, the democratic processes, have put Julia into that position, and I think she deserves to know that she can move forward with confidence. So I owe that much, but if you're asking me, am I giving her a blank cheque? Most certainly not, I can tell you.
Tony Windsor, what are the elements that you will emphasise to your own electorate? You've explained your decision in terms of the nation and in terms of regional Australia. In terms of your own electorate, What can you say to them that will be a direct benefit to them? And I don't mean a project here and a project there, but how will they see the benefits of your decision to go to Labor?
Well, they will see a project here and a project there as well through this process, but more importantly, in my view, is an injection of funds into regional health, regional infrastructure, regional education, and a number of other areas in terms of regional development. So there'll be some very, very positive signs come out of this. Regional Australia has been ignored, and I think both sides have admitted that during this process. And part of what we've done today is to rectify and restore some equity. My electorate will also see the rollout of the broadband network, which was the game breaker in my view. I think there's enormous opportunity to negate distances being a disadvantage in relation to that. But the wholesale price will be equalised across Australia as well. That's another value add that we've been able to gain in terms of the dealings with the government.
Now, you were on a special 7:30 program on the night after the election, and we talked about some areas on which you might vote one way or another. One of them was the emissions trading scheme, and you indicated that there were other ways to do that. That indicated that you would be inclined to vote against an emissions trading scheme in the life of this Parliament?
Well, I voted against the carbon pollution reduction scheme, the government's previous emissions trading scheme. But I believe we should be doing something about emissions and pollution, and we should be moving towards more renewable sources of energy. And I think there's enormous advantages to regional Australia in looking more closely at some of those things. So I'd be very supportive of what the Prime Minister has indicated, that there will be a sort of a climate commission. I'd quite enjoy being a part of that. And a price of carbon may be inevitable long term. It may well happen globally long term. But I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of this debate. And I don't think we've really entered into what renewable energy can do long term.
And very briefly, before I go back to Bob Catter, would you support a mining tax along the lines of what the Prime Minister promised in this campaign?
Well, we'll have to see when the legislation comes through, but I'm supportive of the concept of a rent resource tax, and so is the Australian Minerals Council. They put a submission to the Henry Review regarding a rent resource tax as opposed to royalties on production. So in terms of this particular piece of legislation, we'll have to see how it comes through. But part of the thing that one of the things that we asked for, Kerry, was a review of the Henry tax review, and mining tax is part of that as well. So there could be a bit of crossover between the two issues. Okay,
Bob Catter, now you've indicated, yes, you put your 20-point position to both parties in terms of what were their policies on your agenda. But you also made a big point today about your relationship with Kevin Rudd, your friendship with Kevin Rudd, and your upset at the way he was disposed of by Labor. How important a factor was that in your decision? And was Kevin Rudd hard to resist when he was presumably asking you over those couple of days that you spent with him fairly intensely through this process to support Labor?
He passionately pleaded the cause of Labor and made a number of telephone calls to that effect as well. He even brought Teresa, who's a lovely lady, in to bend my arm as well. He left no stone unturned in pursuing, trying to get me to back a Labor government. Look, I come from Queensland. Queensland hasn't had a Prime Minister since 1904. We delivered to Australia the greatest man in Australian political history, Ted Theodore, and he got smashed to pieces. Well, I mean, we deliver again a person who delivered broadband network, who delivered the national energy grid, who got us through the most terrible financial crisis in the recent nation's history. And for 2.5 years, I can't remember one single occasion where he attempted to buy a vote, ever. And, I mean, they are 4 very great monuments to his government, even though he was only there for a brief period. So, look, I'd like to say that it was dispassionate, and that was one of the forces why I laid down 20 objective issues so that I couldn't be persuaded because of my anger, and I'm a Queenslander. I naturally had a very great anger over what occurred. But Wayne Swan, I've always got him very, very well with Wayne, and he deserves an awful lot of credit for the national energy grid. It'll be one of the great monuments to this period of Australian history and to the governments that served during this period.
Well, we're out of time on a historic day. It's been a long, slow process, and it's going to be a fascinating 3 years. Good luck to you both in that time, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Kerry.